have papers. Not, besides that, he does not even need paper for that anyway, because it is illegal. And he was caught in the act. So the instrument of operation that he had is what was destroyed. So I think it's straightforward. Whether that's the best is a different matter entirely. But was that did they act in line with the rules of engagement? Yes, they did.
Of course, reactions have trailed that comment coming from the Chief of Defense Staff, and one of them is that of Mr. Femi Falana, who joins us this morning, the Senior Advocate of Nigeria. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Before we go into that, if you don't mind speaking to some of the issues just raised about political violence starting, taking place in Zamfara, particularly that comment, with which Chamberlain closed, that security agencies ought to be on top of their game to ensure that these things don't spiral out of control. One life has been lost and several people have been wounded already.
Well, violence is part of the game as far as members of the political class are concerned, because there's nobody to bring them to book.
Really?
Oh, yes.
Not even the laws?
The laws are there, but they are violated, they are breached by the ruling party, by the government of the day.
Doesn't that make the security agencies culpable who are supposed to uphold the laws?
For sure, but the enforcement of the law in a neo-colonial environment is anchored on what they call the body language of the president, or what does the government of the day want. I mean, you're talking of Zamfara state. There are states where the situation is worse.
Just a quick follow-up.
I mean, just for instance, in Rivers State, the government of the day has gone to court to say no other political party apart from PDP should contest election. The governor has rolled out policies that will make it impossible for other political parties apart from the ruling party to even stage rallies and campaign. So, but what has the system put in place? By virtue of Section 145 of the Electoral Act 2022, it is the INEC that is empowered to prosecute electoral offenders. And INEC has made the point abundantly clear that it doesn't have it's not in a position to add managing elections to the prosecution of electoral offenders. I think last year, July, the Senate passed the bill, Electoral Offenses Commission Bill. Up to now, the House of Reps has not passed it. And the elections are just a few months ago.
Just a quick follow-up to that, sir. When it comes to matters of insecurity, state governors are quick to say that they're not in control of the security apparatus, that the commissioners of police report to the president. But in this case now, we find that security operatives were on ground, according to the PDP deputy chairman that was here. And despite that, the violence, persisted, and it spiraled out of the control to the extent that one person died and the other persons were wounded. So what happened in this case?
If you know the way
that the security operatives looked on and the violence continued.
If you know the way the police is funded, you will know that majority of police commissions are at the beck and call of the governors. Apart from the payment of the salaries of police officers by the federal government, state governments are fully in charge in terms of providing logistics and payment of allowances to mobilize the police to carry out their functions. So in that kind of situation, it is difficult to say that governors are not in charge. Hence, on the eve of elections, commissioners of police are transferred out of their commands in order to ensure that there is some facade of neutrality on the part of security forces.
Well, another, perhaps in the same breath, still talking about Zamfara, is that comment, that the state government, well, the APC representative that we've interviewed just said the state government didn't shut down the stations, it sealed off the stations. And of course, clearly my colleague was befuddled. What's the difference between sealing off so that no one can go out, no one can come in, and shutting down the organization so that they can't operate, at all? What, in your opinion?
I think whoever made that statement is playing on words.
Well, he just,
and whether it's sealing off or closing down, it's illegal.
Fine, but so what should happen? What kind of punitive measures should happen so that no other state government will be able to do that?
The victims have to go to court. And this has continued because media houses, including yours, never challenge the authorities when your station is shut down and you have to go and pay millions of naira without anybody taking you to court. You have to pay illegal fines and you pay. So unless media houses are prepared to challenge authoritarian tactics and practices, it's going to continue.
Well, perhaps, one of the arguments, talking about the oil theft thing, one of the arguments that I have also proffered is, look, if state governments can be as active as what Zamfara State did, couldn't state governments also have gotten ahead of these oil theft things? Yes, I mean, it's not under their authority and all of that, but there is the argument that, look, maybe state governments should actually step up security as much as they can to protect facilities that
frankly speaking,
country.
The Constitution prescribes that governors are chief security officers of their states. And therefore, they must ensure that they put in place a mechanism to guarantee law and order. So you cannot, as a governor, throw up your hands in helplessness. No, you must take those steps allowed by law to guarantee law and order in your state without using the instrumentality of the state to harass your political opponents. Everybody must be treated equally under the law. And I've read governors complain, oh, we've set up a security network and the operatives are not allowed to bear weapons. Again, I find it unacceptable.
Where is the law?
The law has to be applied evenly. I am aware that at least two states in Nigeria are allowed to acquire weapons for their security personnel, including AK-47 rifles.
Not the police.
No, not the police.
Allowed by the law, in spite of the Firearms Act.
By the government. You apply to the president. You apply to the Inspector General of Police. And I know that those two states, I'm talking of Borno State and Katsina State. And in any case, you don't expect young men and women to combat terrorists with bows and arrows.
What makes those two states different? What stands them apart?
Nothing, except that other states will have to insist that we be treated equally.
You said they applied.
Yes.
And they were granted.
Under the law, you are required to apply.
Okay. And they were granted the license.
Yes. Oh, yes.
So
I'm aware of that.
Is that also to say that all other 34 states can apply?
Of course.
And should be granted?
And must be, and if they are not given, they must go to court to challenge the discriminatory treatment on the part of the federal government.
Okay.
That is what democracy is all about.
Okay.
But don't go around complaining when you should fight for your rights.
Okay. Now, let's go to the oil theft, issue. One of the things that still worries me is why it seems like even state governors cannot, within the precincts of their, territories, especially in the Niger Delta, do whatever they can to protect the oil facilities. The River State government, for instance, at some point, the governor went around and said, look, I've discovered this, I've discovered that, I've discovered that. And the River State is not the only oil-producing state in Nigeria.
Unfortunately, the oil-producing states, or the governments of the oil-producing states, have generally left the issue of security, have abandoned it to the federal government.
The security of the oil facilities?
Generally. What the state governments in the Niger Delta region are required to do is to mobilize the communities, the people, to defend the facilities. But you have a situation whereby all manners of task forces under a democratic government are set up, manned by military personnel. And these guys operate as if they are not under the law. So the governors simply see this business as that of Abuja. And that is what is going on. But so what you are supposed to do under a democratic government is to acquire modern equipment to monitor all pipelines.
Well, that's the business of the federal government, right?
Yes. At the local level, the communities must be organized by the state governments.
So it's
to defend the facilities.
It's a joint operation at that level between the state government and the federal government.
Should be. But right now, the federal government has excluded the state governments in policing the Niger Delta. So in all that you read about, nobody mentions the state governments. And the state governments on their own have not made it their duty to secure their areas. And that's why we're in a mess.
So can Delta State, for instance, stand apart and says it doesn't know anything that happened in Forcados for 9 years where crude oil was siphoned? So can the state governors...
You see, again, we're diverting attention. That criminality has to be properly traced and tracked to Shell and the so-called international oil majors who have in their offices their laptops where they monitor what goes on anywhere in the area of operation. So why do you keep on blaming our people? Oh, we're blaming the state government. Can the state government say it's not aware? Who owns the pipeline? Who owns the pipeline? It's like saying you have a car, right? For running your business. And for 9 years, you are not aware that the car has been abandoned. I beg your pardon. Our people should not be insulted. We should not be insulted.
But then if we are laying it at the feet of the oil producing company, how about the security agencies?
with the connivance of military and political, leaders.
You see, when you talk about, when we hear stuff like, it's the military, is the, political leaders, it sounds rather vague. There are certain individuals, for 9 years, as Bukola pointed out, there are certain individuals that have been assigned.
Of course.
And I'm pretty sure that there are records to who and who have been assigned to where over the years.
When we talk of political leaders, we're talking of the establishment, the agencies that have been set up by the government, funded by the government, to track and monitor those pipelines. But because they have abandoned their duties, and because nobody is going to question them. So it's a case of a systematic dysfunctional state that we're operating.
Whether or not it is orchestrated, Mr. Falana, is something that we should also interrogate, but we'll do that when we return from this break. Please, please. Well, Mr. Femi Falana is still with us this morning. We're talking about this whole crude oil theft thing. First of all, let me, as we continue this conversation, are you surprised? Are you shocked? Are you in any way baffled by the quantum of revelations that have happened over time? I ask that because the president and a sizable number of people over the years have said our fuel is being stolen. And it's not once, not twice, not thrice that this has been said. So that we are making these discoveries so far, the discoveries that have been made now. Is this something that surprises you?
No, not at all. I defend a number of communities in the Niger Delta against oil pollution at home and abroad. So I'm not in any way taken aback. And nobody in the Niger Delta is surprised. And when you talk of discovery, I beg your pardon. I think it was Punch newspaper, the editorial that put it very, very well when he said that discovery reminds one of the discovery of River Niger, by some colonialists. The communities, the local people have known the source of River Niger for ages, So you can't say you are discovering. What is going on? All this discovery with great razzmatazz. It's meant to divert the attention of Nigerians from the sources of the crime. Or Bonnie, Vessel, and they're all pretending now. Oh, we have just discovered. There are criminals.
I was asking a question about leaders earlier on.
Yes.
We've had a minister of petroleum for 8 years, who is Mr. President, and this theft has gone on under his watch. What questions of accountability?
No, the oil theft started 22 years ago. And every regime promised to deal with it.
But what questions should we be asking of Mr. President as the Minister of Petroleum?
Now, this time around, we should be asking the Minister of Petroleum Resources to give explanation to Nigerians. Because our OPEC quota now is 1.8 million barrels per day. We are barely producing 900,000 barrels per day. And the GMD of NMPC went to the National Assembly a few days ago to say, oh, we are losing 600,000 barrels per day. Now, you are now just being, because the whole world has turned Nigeria into a boat of jokes. Everybody, how can you have a government in place? And this level of oil theft is going on. So the government has now woken up to discover that there are pipelines that have been producing oil for 9 years, exporting oil out of the country. So we have to do something about it now. But we have not got to the root yet.
So what would this route be for you?
We must identify, if we want to stop it once and for all, the government must identify, expose, name and shame all the companies and public officers that are involved in the oil theft. The companies are known. I know some of them by the nature of my work. A few years ago, we told the government, we did a study. The oil that left Nigeria and discharged in one port in America, Philadelphia port, was about 60.2 million liters, valued at $12.7 billion. We sent
within
3 years. One port. We sent a petition to the government, to the EFCC. A top official of the government said, don't investigate, don't mind them. In frustration, we had to sue in court. We're in court against Shell, against Total, against Chevron, against Ajib, and some shipping companies that colluded with them to take our oil illegally out of the country. One port. There are other ports all over the world where our oil has been stolen and taken to. Now, if the government is committed today to trace the countries and ports where our oil has been taken to.
In that suit, senior advocate, you've mentioned 4 oil companies.
Yes.
In that suit,
Yes.
are government officials also named? Because that quantum of oil could not have been stolen without the connivance of some state government, federal government officials.
No, we don't have the evidence. We deal with evidence as lawyers. But we have the evidence of those who took what out of Nigeria within a period of 3 years.
Now, within those 3 years.
Now the duty of the government. But the government wasn't interested to now say, how did this oil get out of Nigeria?
Which is the question, raises the question of security officials.
Because they were loaded somewhere.
Which raises the question of security officials, Mr. Falana.
No, there's no doubt about that. Nobody has denied the fact that security officials are involved. Nobody has denied that.
But then
in fact, that is why every military officer wants to serve in the Niger Delta.
But you also...
By being a member of the task force.
You released a statement recently concerning this, the destruction of some, consignment of oil, vessel and all of that.
Yes.
Now, the reason for that...
I am asking that the chief of defense staff, who came out publicly to defend her, be asked to resign.
No.
Because we must start somewhere.
I agree with you, but before we even get to that point, there must be some, because he went with the GMD of the NNPC to the Niger Delta to look at some of these things, that were, those points that we talked about. They went, whether for the photos or whatever it is, they went there. They saw these things. Okay, fine. However, shouldn't we be asking the military and whoever else, Navy, all of them in the military, to answer questions?
No,
who specifically should be answering this question?
That is what I started yesterday. But let us start with the chief of defense staff that has come out publicly, General Rabo, Lucky Rabo, to say, yes, we have the right to burn the vessel. How? He said, under rules of engagement. Under what section? Under what paragraph of the rules of engagement? And I have come out to say, under the Armed Forces Act, Section 111.
111. Yeah.
Burning a vessel, burning a ship, burning a building. It's a serious criminal offense. If the suspects are convicted, it's life imprisonment, no option of fine. So it's not something you can just poo-poo.
That's
so we are banned.
Well,
no.
Mr. Falana, that's the section on the screen now for everyone to see. Yes. Section 111, subsection B, speaks specifically to any vessel, ship, aircraft, railway track, or wagon, or vehicle, or thing, that such a person is subjected to, it has committed an guilty of arson and liable on conviction by a court-martial to imprisonment for life.
Yes, that's by a person under service law.
That person will also be court-martialed by the military.
Yes, but that's what the law says.
So what rules of engagement is the chief of defense staff quoting?
No, you should be asking him. There's nothing like that. There's no such provision in the rules of engagement. And the rules of engagement have to be read subject to the law. Oh, yes. So nobody has challenged the fact that this is the law. That any military officer, any military personnel that sets fire deliberately and willfully to a ship or a vessel is committed an offense. Because under the law, all those who engage in oil bunkering, and hired or bought the vessel, have to be arrested and prosecuted. Then the court, only a court of law in Nigeria, can make an interim order of forfeiture of the vessel. If they are eventually convicted and the case is concluded, the court will make a permanent order, final order of forfeiture. No military officer, no political leader in Nigeria has the right to say, go and burn the vessel
in the event
containing stolen crude oil. Nobody has the power in Nigeria.
Which could be evidence.
No, it's evidence. That is destruction of evidence.
Now, the National Assembly...
It's another offense.
It's another offense altogether.
Destruction of evidence.
Now,
scandalizing the military is another offense.
Now, we have committees at the National Assembly charged with, oversighting activities of the military, such as this. And in fact...
They don't oversight. No. National Assembly? No, National Assembly? No. They don't oversight these guys. They don't oversight them.
By
a lot of, I can tell you,
error of omission or commission?
Since 1999, a lot of committees have been set up by the Senate and the House of Reps. None of them has come up with any report that could address the problem. Once those committees are set up, The oil companies move there. Military officers and individuals who are involved in the criminal enterprise move there to, unquote, lobby the members of the committee. And at the end of the day, they are
So you're not expecting that questions will be asked of the Chief of Defense Staff by the relevant committees, charged with oversighting the activities of the military, especially the setting ablaze of this vessel?
No, of course. No, the Chief of Staff has, while insulting all of us, said nothing will happen. No, we can do it. We can do it.
So, Mr. Falana,
and that is the end of the matter. But it cannot be the end of the matter.
Just to be clear, you said earlier that they don't oversight the military.
No.
But then you also said now that those questions, you agree with Bukola that those questions should be asked by the same committees.
No, not the committee. Nigerian staff, we're asking the questions now. The questions are beyond the four walls of the National Assembly.
But the committees should ask those questions on behalf of Nigerians.
No, you see why we shouldn't waste that time. Even if the committee asks the questions and they come out with a report, it will still have to go to the EFCC or the ICPC because the committees cannot implement their findings and their report. And that is why we should stop wasting the resources of the country. Okay. Where a crime has been dictated, you will send the petition to either the police or the anti-graft agencies so that we don't waste money.
Okay. Well, Mr. Falana, it will seem like there's some form of some kind of conundrum in all this conversation. The NNPC is a limited liability company, so to speak, right now. And the president is the Minister of Petroleum. He has a Minister of State for Petroleum. Yes. And all these oil installations are owned by the state. And now NNPC is like the company that belongs to the state and all of that. So in tackling this crude oil theft, how, in your opinion, according to the laws, should it be addressed? The president is not happy with the oil theft. He has made that clear several times. And consequently, these revelations ought to help to address some of the issues that he's been raising over time. But then there is the issue of the NNPC Limited. So how, in your opinion, should this be addressed according to the laws?
In the first place, the president has demonstrably lost confidence in the competence of the military to address this problem. Hence, a contract has been awarded to a non-state actor, Mr. Government Kampolo, a.k.a. Tompolo, who is said to be making these discoveries now. You understand me? But that itself is a colossal embarrassment to a state that is supposed to be functional. Oh, we have lost confidence in our armed forces and the police, particularly the Navy. We are now giving a contract to a private person, a private company, to help us. That's number one. Number two, so ordinarily, the service chiefs should simply have resigned. Mr. President, you have lost confidence in us. But since they have failed to resign, and we must start with the Chief of Defense that has come out publicly to justify criminality. Secondly, the President as the Minister of Petroleum Resources and as a Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces will have to ensure that all those who are indicted in this act of oil theft are fired. It cannot be business as usual. Otherwise, it's going to continue. Three, the oil companies that are involved, because those oil companies are so powerful, they are more powerful than the government. This time around, the federal government of Nigeria must show that we're in charge of this country. And therefore, go after the oil company. If the government wants information, it is out there. We are ready to assist. I've just told you of one case. Another one. A law was not implemented for 18 years. The Deep Offshore Inland Basin Act. I campaigned for 4 years to get that law amended. And the oil companies, government officials just ignored me. At a stage We even drafted a bill for the amendment and sent to the National Assembly. I think the Senate, a member of the Senate adopted it and it was discussed before because it was abandoned. Now, what happened? At the end of the day, 3 state governments went to court, Rivers, Bayelsa, and Akwa Ibom, on that matter, and the Supreme Court said, go and collect the money, royalties for 18 years. The government discovered that what we have lost was $60 billion. The Attorney General wrote to the oil companies, thou shalt pay. The Minister of State, in the Ministry of Petroleum Resources, Mr. Silva, came out publicly. You can Google. Say nobody can collect that kind of money, that sum of money. And that's where we are.
Mr. Falana, let's look at it holistically. And I'm glad you mentioned earlier that you represent some of these...
And we're going around borrowing money.
...oil-producing communities. And since these discoveries, quote and unquote, are being made, the HostCom have come out to speak. And they're quoting Section 257, subsection 2 of the PIA Act.
Yes.
And they are saying that government, copiously came up with this law, yes, which states that any act of sabotage that occurs in their communities that affects that the affected communities would forfeit the actual payment accruable to them in the PIA. Do you agree with this host communities?
It's an illegal provision.
You agree that it's an illegal provision?
It's an illegal provision. You cannot punish me. You can't punish those communities for the criminality of the people we are trying to
but then how
identify now.
But then how do you tie it back to the discoveries of the River State governor of so many illegal refineries which could not have gone on without them tapping illegally into crude oil?
You know what happened? What happened is that it is the government that determines how law and order will be enforced in a country. If the communities discover, and see, as it is the case in Nigeria, that the government is not committed to eradicating oil bunkering, if they discover that security personnel deployed in that area to check oil bunkering are deeply involved, what do you expect the communities to do? So that's what is going on. But please, let us get the communities properly involved. Let the government return to the rule of law. The government must, without any further waste of time, inaugurate, reconstitute the Niger Delta Development Corporation, which was contributing to tracking this oil theft. But now, that body is not reconstituted.
Mr. Falana, I'm wondering how we're going to take on the host communities without involving the states. That's a conversation that has to take
the states have to.
Subsequent.
Oh yes, I agree with
on this one.
I agree with you.
Because it's a lot, and of course,
you know why all this? Not just the oil producing state, all the state governments in Nigeria.
Exactly.
Because we're losing so much, you can't get money from the federation account because the money meant for development of the country. And
unfortunately, it goes back to the same communities because they have to. Yes. We have to thank you very much this morning, Mr. Femi Falana, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, for your comments this morning. Truly appreciate it.